joined by three gentlemen already to have a second discussion on the program this morning. From my immediate left, I have Dr. Patrick Awosage, legal practitioner. Thank you for coming on the program.
It's my pleasure.
We appreciate it. Next to him is Fred Uyigwe. He's a politician and an economist. Thank you also for coming.
Thanks for having me. Good morning, viewers, and compliments of the season.
And next to Fred is a very regular face on most of our programs on television. No other person than Comrade Austin Osakwe is, of course, a public affairs analyst. Thank you for coming on the program, sir.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it. Gentlemen, let's get right to it. Let me begin with you, Barrister Awosage. Let's talk about constituency projects, which of course we understand are very critical.
Yes.
But let's do a quick assessment of how effective they've been in the last couple of years.
Thank you very much. Like you rightly said, constituency projects is something that should be sacrosanct. It's not to be wished away.
Okay.
You know, over time, we cannot begin to assess so much, so to speak, because we've not seen so much of it, in as much as it has also become a campaign strategies for politicians and political actors to say, this is what I've done for my constituency, as it were. This should be a regular thing that ordinarily should be done. You know, over time, like it's an issue, so to say, that it's not been, they've not done so much.
Okay.
I have not seen so much, in as much as we see some of them come up. You know, we see we've given grinding machines, we've given barrels, motorcycles, and all whatnot to several persons in my constituency. But if you marry that up with what is, you know, given to them, you see that's a far cry from what is dished out. But in as much as we must also commend those persons that have engaged in things like that, but we cannot begin to say they have done so well in the sense that the money equivalent is so much. It's a far cry from what they have given out. But how about those that have not done anything at all, that we will consider they have not done anything?
That's obviously a matter of relativity.
You understand? Yes, when we say, when you look at it, say, you talk about constituency projects and you know your people, before you were picked to go and represent them at the level of Senate or National Assembly, wherever you have been asked to go represent them in that capacity, obviously you know the plight of the community. You know what you have been, you know, the people have been going through. So when you come back and you share some handkerchiefs for them, and then you say you have embarked on constituency project, put some borehole, what does it take to sink a borehole? I said you have done something, that's government present now. Because when you're talking about constituency project, it's talking about government present. If an individual can just say, okay, let me get a few friends and we sink a borehole, then you are telling us constituency project is that. So these are some of the things. Over the years, and again, we must understand that over time, there have not been accountability, so to speak. So it's more or less like the security vote we talk about. Just receive the money, it's your money, whichever way. Nobody is auditing you, nobody is asking you questions. All you do is that you've spent the money. So I think that has been the issue. I think we need to begin to ask the people in the constituency, need to know. They need to begin to ask questions. You have been given XYZ money to attend to us. So if you have not measured up to expectation, they should go. But again, how will you go about that? What are the leeways at which these persons could come up, or those that know so well about it, could champion it and then go to, is it justiciable? How do we see that?
Let me go straight now to Fred. He has talked about many of the items that these politicians who are representing their people in varying capacities bring back home to say, we're empowering you with this and with that. Up until now, what we used to see essentially was borehole here, borehole there. But it appears things are looking up now for whatever it's worth. What's your assessment?
We must go back to the very idea of the initiative, having a constituency project operated or overseen by the elected officials. Okay. To start with, they clamored for it because they wanted, they understood the psychology of the electorate. That being legislators, the electorate will have nothing to, no developmental plan or program or initiative to associate directly with them. So it was a selfish initiative. It was an initiative they wanted to be able to tie to themselves, so that when they go before the electorate again for re-election, then they will be seen to have done something. Okay. Just like the initiative to self-compensate themselves astronomically. Okay. It was so as to entrench themselves in the position so that when they go to elections, they will have enough money to spend where the federal government or where the governments are not supporting candidates. So these are all selfish initiatives. But nonetheless, it can be better operated because it is not something that is not an initiative that we can wish away, because those who go there will always have that selfish mindset to continue with such initiatives. So that already being there, how do we make the initiative better? Like the doctor has said, learned barrister has said, there has to be guidelines for executing these initiatives.
And you think we don't have those guidelines?
The guidelines have to be enforced. Okay? There have to be guidelines, accountability guidelines, transparency guidelines, performance guidelines, oversight guidelines. These are people who are supposed to oversee projects, oversee policy execution, oversee projects and programs execution. But they now also want to assume executive positions, executive functions by initiating programs of their own, and then they also have the oversight over it. When you do that, you leave room for abuse and for fraud. That's why.
Is that misplaced? Is it misplaced?
Yes, that is why in the very first place, we operate a presidential system of government that has separation of powers, separation of functions, separation of powers and separation of functions. The legislature or the legislative arm, they are supposed to legislate, determine where and when development is needed, and then pass laws accordingly. Pass it on to the executive, and then the executive does we execute. That is it. Then if there's a conflict, that's when you bring in the judiciary.
So interpret.
So to interpret, to say, okay, this is what these legislators have mandated should be done, and you are not doing what they have mandated should be done. That is the essence of the democracy we operate. Okay. The type of democracy.
I want to shift it straight away to Comrade Austin Sakwe now. Just this week, the federal government says it has released at least 50% of constituency allowance to legislators. Some persons have argued vehemently that the legislators have no business being custodian of the monies meant for constituency projects. Is this whole thing shrouded in secrecy from your point of view?
I have always been doggedly and unrepentantly opposed to the very idea of constituency projects.
Altogether?
Altogether. I think that the issue of constituency projects is an indication of our level of underdevelopment. And then the tendency to politic. We politicize everything. And then, of course, greed. And I'll bring you into my world. Stricto sensu, there are three arms of government. Traditionally, the legislature is to make laws. By extension, provide oversight functions over the executive. The executive is there to implement those laws, which translates to projects anyway, whether constituency or budget projects. And then, of course, you have the judiciary to act as arbiter and apportion blame where the blame arises. What we have had over time, and I talked about underdevelopment, Nigeria is at a stage where we measure governance by borehole. We measure governance by the sharing of umbrellas in the dry season. We measure governance by the sharing of sewing machines. That's not governance. Ideally, the legislature should. Now, the legislators represent constituencies of persons who have sent them to go and perform a specific role constitutionally. And I'm happy that the lawyer is here. The Constitution has specified certain functions for the legislature. One of them is not constituency projects. Constituency projects arose, one, out of the innate envy by legislators that the executive is managing so much money, and therefore they are the ones calling the shots. That's how governors became leaders of parties and not chairmen. That's how president became leader of party. That's how local government chairman became leader of the party. Because they were the one holding, they are the custodian of the funds. Legislators also want to play at that level. That's one. The second is that we are dealing with people who are still largely illiterate and unenlightened. So when you go to campaign and you tell them that what you are going to do is to go and make laws, it doesn't make sense to them. Because what they want to see is that you are pointed at a particular road that was done. So while we are blaming the legislators for politicking with the entire idea, we need to look at the people that they are serving. What are they asking for? They are asking for physical projects. That's the whole idea of constituency projects. But this is where the problem began. Because number one, having accepted that, of course, having twisted the hand of the executive to accommodate constituency projects, there is no corresponding laid down guidelines to ensure transparency. I have heard legislators argue that they don't see the money, that they don't touch it.
But isn't that true?
That is the executive. I'm coming. That is the executive that manages. But I also ask the question, in pre-qualifying contractors that go to execute, do legislators have any say at all? Researches have been done. The latest one was the one done using Lagos as a baseline. That most of the time, if not all of the times, the same legislators are able to influence the pre-qualification of contractors. So are they hankering over this constituency project because they really want to go and produce at the local level? I ask the question, for instance, how many of these legislators who are crying over constituency project funds have and maintain constituency offices? Because that's where you should start. When you talk of constituency allowance, at the heart of that constituency allowance is to be able, the capacity to go and manage, to establish and manage constituency offices, which are the basis for constant intercourse and interaction between the legislator and the constituents. But that is not there. Even where you have a signboard announcing that there's a constituency office, it's usually locked up until campaign starts for the next elections. The people go there and nobody attends to them. I mean, this is in the public there. People are watching and they know what the truth is. So essentially, if constituency projects are a demonstration of the love of the legislator for his constituents, let them begin first by running effective constituency offices and attending to questions and yearnings, aspirations. Two, the same fervor, the same zeal that they show with constituency projects, let them show it with budget projects. Why should a legislator representing a constituency turn a blind eye when contracts awarded by either the federal government or state governments in those constituencies are abandoned and they do nothing about it? All they yearn after, all they hanker after is the constituency projects. I tell you that it is the pecuniary interest in it that is the driver. That's one. The second is this, sir. Now, when we talk about constituency projects, how do we distinguish that? Because I have given it a name now. Constituency projects appear to be the one legislators are pushing. What are the projects that the executive has the constitutional responsibility to go and implement? We call them budget projects. Nobody talks about that. The legislators should restrict themselves to making good laws and overseeing the executive, and then enlighten our people that that is the role they are expected to play and nothing more. Campaign gimmicks, election gimmicks, the desire to remain in office at all costs, forever if possible, is what drives all of this. So if you ask me, until I am convinced that there is a clear and transparent process put in place to ensure that the legislator does not become involved in the award of contracts and does not have pecuniary interest in those projects, I'm not going to give it my support. In any case, do we have a way of ascertaining, which I think the lawyer has pointed at, and my elder brother here has pointed at, if constituency fund is X and what is spent is Y, is there a way now in Nigeria of ensuring that X is equal to Y? Because if X is greater than Y at any time, there's already fraud. In which case, if we allocate 10 naira as constituency project, do we have a way of finding out that that 10 naira has actually been spent on such projects?
So we don't have key performance indicators?
Yes, there are none. To deepen transparency and accountability in the process and to ensure that there's value for money. The constituents have been taken for a ride in the name of constituency projects.
Let me come to you, Dr. Awosage, now. This appears to be a dilemma for the legislator, because on the one hand, he's dealing with the people who essentially are not politically educated enough to understand what the specific roles of the legislator should be. And then on the other hand, he's told that his role should not even be to be running after a constituency project, because in most cases he's driven by what people like Comrade Austin Osakwe would call pecuniary interest. Absolutely. How do we ensure that the legislator stays strictly with his primary call, which is to make laws and, of course, ensure that those laws see the light of day?
Thank you very much. It's obvious that, you see, Fidel Castro said, he said to be moral in an immoral society is immoral. In the sense that if you take a critical look at all we are talking about, who is making the laws that's going to say, okay, let's move for some level of accountability? Right. They are the ones that will say that. Will they now legislate against themselves? Oh no, they will block that and they will want to fight against it. Now they just want that money, like those pecuniary interests they have because they have people, they want to make money for themselves. That's the truth. That's the truth. I was in South Africa last 2 weeks and I saw on the national television why one of the mayor was being quizzed on national television. And then what was he being asked? What was the problem? And I said, this is a normal thing now. They were calling and raining curses on him and all of that he has failed, why he had not been able to clear the sewage for some time. And he was giving reasons why that they have been paid and all this have been done. He was showing evidence on national television, showing to them that, look, we have paid. They said, no, he's incompetent. They were calling that he should be removed. Now, I was wondering, this man did not divert money. This man had paid. Is that the people he paid, they did not attend to it on time. And people are not getting paid. That's what a country. Now, the point we are making now is that until we come to that point, when we really know we are set for business, you have all this project. What is a legislator doing with running around? You have to think. You know, somebody have once said, what those great businessmen are better in politics. And we have also argued again and said, the man that guaranteed the peace that the world have enjoyed today is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I don't know if the business is set up. So it's not about the business. So the legislator and the leader in that regard should be thinking of laws, of things that will better the lots of the people. So but because of the way it is now, everybody is in a rat race to making money, we want to make so much money. So everything is working in that light. Then I give you transformer. Somebody is not campaigning with, we are bringing transformer to your locality, as if it's not their right. So these are the issues. So when we take a critical look at what is happening over time, it's obvious that it's like there's a gang up, if you permit me to use such words, you know, by these actors, so to speak, to make money and perpetuate themselves in office. Like he had rightly said, governor is now the leader of the party, and then the money is being dished out at will, and well, just you tell your men, get to church for us and let's push this one, and then there's some money we share here and there. That's the business. If you are really out there and there's an independent body should look into the activities, should check it. Will they allow that? Oh no, but who have the right to do that? The people can still come up and say yes, but the same people you want to tell to do that, they don't even know. So they would not say, no, he's our leader. Many Nigerians don't even know their rights up to today. So how will he not come up to say, I beg that it can't work? It can't work. Look at what little Julius Malema of 37 years did in South Africa. When he was fighting Jacob Zuma, they said, no, can this happen? But what he has come up, that's a country that when you have evidence, nobody is going to play with it. There are several evidence flying around, they will still tell you it's a lie. Somebody said my certificate there, he said I have so and so persons who are certificated by custody, and then I have this and that. They said it's a lie, it was fake, and all. You know, a whole lot of stories come up that they are withholding him, his political issues. Somebody is stealing, you are saying his political enemies are after him. What I'm trying to say is that we are in a country that we allow a whole lot of things to happen at the same time. So for us to have it well with our people and with the governors and with those in power and all of that is for us to sit up and really ask ourselves these fundamental questions, like Fela Anikulapo had said years ago, 1978, when he was registering his party. He said, if I become president, I will ask Nigeria to really look critically at it. Do we want to change? Do we want to kill corruption? If we agree, then we end it. Because it's more or less like stealing here, stealing there, stealing here, stealing there. Even now in this government, it's all about that. They are releasing 50%. I'm coming to that. 50% of the constitution, whatever. Why now? Okay, what are we going to execute now? You are releasing, is it not to be shared? So that money goes back to the hands of some persons to win them. So I see it as some level of kind of bribery in my own take.
In 1 minute, in 1 minute, Fred Uyigwe, how it will appear, I mean, for whatever it's worth now, all the chances are that constituency projects are here to stay. How do we beat them into shape to make the most of them if, of course, we cannot abolish them altogether?
I will start from one point that the barrister raised. Having an independent monitoring system in place. Because when you have that, that is comprised of people outside of the government, appointed, there will be systems by which you appoint those members.
Right.
If you have that in place, then those who push for the projects, for those constituency projects, they become cautious as to how they handle whatever they are given to spend on behalf of the people. And that begins to remove that pecuniary interest from the initiative.
Okay.
That is one. Number two, we must sit down and have the whole system re-examined so that you come up with a guideline on how to operate an efficient system. Because the very system by itself operates outside the planned system of the budget.
Yes.
It is a random and reactive system of budgetary expenditure. And that is not what you want. Because for you to have an efficient system in place, you need to plan every single aspect of your budget from the beginning to the end. So where these legislators clamor for constituency projects, then they are at liberty to execute them and apply them or channel them according to their own whims and caprices. And that should not be the case with budgets. The focus should always be on efficiency. To do that, it must go through established institutions that have been designed, that have been in place, where you have officers that have been trained to execute projects, to pre-qualify projects, to pre-qualify contractors, and to determine where project placements should be prioritized.
Right.
How to prioritize projects execution. So you need to be able to do all of that to have that efficiency.
Okay.
And that is where we must start. We must go back to the drawing board. Okay, let me quickly say this. Those who took over government at the inception of the transition from military dictatorship to
civilian rule.
Civilian rule.
Right.
Saw an opportunity to sideline and exclude those who would be better qualified than themselves, and then began to make laws and began to put policies in place to exclude them from the ballot, so they do not have ballot access. They even extended it to their own political parties. That is why, for example, a political party will ask aspirants to pay 20 and 25 million to buy nomination and expression of interest forms. It's insane. To qualify as a U.S. president to contest an election, you only need to pay $500. And if you have 10,000 signatures, you don't pay a dime.
Okay, I think we're just going to...
So the thing is,
yes.
Let me quickly conclude by this, that if we do not bring in people who are qualified to run our government, we will always operate within the mediocrity of the system we find ourselves in now.
Okay, Austin Sakwe, just in 1 minute, how do we put this whole thing in context and ensure that we keep the main thing as far as constituency projects are concerned?
Sorry, you need to first establish very deeply the fraud around constituency projects.
Okay.
Number one, there are allegations among
and we have to do it in 1 minute.
Yes, politicians
yes.
claiming that what people, this one is parading our constituency projects are actually not constituency projects or federal government projects or state projects. That's one. Two, all this issue of budget adding, budget is missing, budget delays, where June we don't even have a budget already signed, is stemming from constituency projects and twisting the executive to allocate money for individuals to go and shine. All of that is fraud. And I'll tell you this, we talk about legislators, they are claiming those projects as if they donated money to do it from their personal pockets. That's the impression being given. And when they go to the villages, they are celebrated for this. If he brought his own money to come and give us this, to come and give us that. Meanwhile, it's our money. So when you ask, I would rather take a shortcut that the Nigerian people must bring enough pressure to bear. And Laura said these people are the ones to make the law, so they can't do it to change themselves. In other societies, in fact, in every society, including Nigeria, when the pressure is enough, people come to realize that if they don't change by themselves, they will atrophy. They will be doomed by the system that they are propagating. As long as it is not fair, it is not just, it's not equitable, it will not bring peace but violence. So, for me, on the final note, the very idea of constituency projects should be jettisoned. Let the lawmakers who are sent there, because they have the capacity to go and speak for the people and make law and provide oversight, let them do that while the executive implements. If there are shenanigans in the system, picayunes, let the judiciary come in and resolve them.
All right, end of story. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the program this morning. We appreciate the value you brought into this discussion. That's where we're ending our second discussion on the program this morning. We're back shortly to wrap it up on Thursday's TMI.